Pick up any shirt in your closet. Flip the tag. If it says, "Made in Bangladesh," here's what you paid for. The factory got $3 for that shirt. The worker who sewed it, 25 to 60 cents. That's roughly 2% of what you spent at the register. Where does the rest go? Bangladesh is the world's second largest garment exporter, $39 billion in clothing last year. And it cannot afford to pay its workers more. Not because the money doesn't exist, but because the moment wages rise, brands move orders to Vietnam, Cambodia, or Ethiopia. The country's greatest economic achievement is also its prison. And in November 2026, the one trade advantage keeping this system alive expires. The threats are converging from 4 directions at once. First, trade preferences. Bangladesh is about to lose its least developed country status. EU tariffs on garments jump from 0 to 9 to 12% overnight. Economists estimate $5.7 billion a year in lost export revenue. Some projections push that to $8 billion. Second, competition. Vietnam's garment exports hit $44 billion in 2024. Vietnam has 16 free trade agreements. Bangladesh has essentially 0. Third, climate. The World Bank projects 13 million Bangladeshis internally displaced by 2050. In August 2024, floods cut garment production by 50%. Fourth, political collapse. The student uprising of July 2024 toppled the government. The UN estimates up to 1,400 people killed in weeks. 245 garment factories shuttered. Every cheap t-shirt in your drawer is a bet on this system holding together, and the odds are getting worse. To understand why Bangladesh can't escape, you have to understand how it got trapped in the first place. In 1980, Bangladesh exported $1.8 million worth of garments. By 2023, that number was $47 billion. That's a 26,000-fold increase in 4 decades. Garments went from less than 4% of exports to 84% of everything Bangladesh sells to the world. No other country on earth is this dependent on a single low-value industry. The opening came from the multi-fiber arrangement in 1974, a trade deal that limited textile exports from China and accidentally created space for Bangladesh. The bargain was simple: the cheapest labor on the planet in exchange for the only economic engine that could lift 170 million people above famine. And it worked. Sort of. GDP per capita rose from roughly $300 in 1990 to $2,500 by 2024. But at what cost? Now, who runs this system? 3 names you should know. H&M buys $2.59 billion a year from Bangladesh. Inditex, that's Zara, $2.18 billion. Primark, $1.12 billion. Average price paid across the board, $3 per garment. These 3 companies alone spend nearly $6 billion a year in Bangladesh, and they pay less per shirt than you pay for a coffee. On the other side, the BGMEA, 1,800 member factories, serves as the industry's political lobby. And the workers? Roughly 4 million people. Now, you've probably heard that 80% of garment workers are women. That number is outdated. BGMEA's own biometric data shows it's now 52 to 60% female. The decline doesn't reflect progress. It reflects conditions so bad that women are being pushed out. Remember that. We'll come back to why it matters. The state itself is hooked. Garments account for 81% of export revenue, and the country depends on $30 billion in remittances, money sent home by Bangladeshis working abroad. The entire economy rests on 2 legs: cheap shirts and cheap labor exported overseas. And later, I'll show you which of those 2 legs is actually bigger, because it's not the one you think. Before 2013, this was a Wild West. 5,000 buildings housing garment operations, minimal safety inspections, brands actively avoiding knowledge of what happened in their supply chains. For decades the system worked, at least for the brands. Then, on April 24, 2013, the cost of cheap clothing was paid in human lives. Rana Plaza. April 24, 2013. 8:45 in the morning. 5 garment factories crammed inside one 8-story commercial building. Structural cracks had been spotted the day before. Workers were ordered back inside under threat of losing a month's wages. The building collapsed. 1,134 dead. Over 2,500 injured. Sohail Rana, the building owner, a local political official in the ruling party's youth wing, had illegally added 4 floors and ignored every warning. Arrested 4 days later, fleeing toward India. His murder trial? 41 accused, still pending as of 2026. Only one of 594 witnesses has testified. 13 years later, 1 witness. The world was horrified. Brands pledged reform. The Accord on Fire and Building Safety was signed within 3 weeks. And then, brands started paying less per garment than before the collapse. Here's what happened next. The system that killed them got more efficient at extracting value from the survivors. So did things get better after Rana Plaza? The definitive study came from Mark Anna at Penn State's Center for Global Workers' Rights. Since Rana Plaza, the price paid by brands to Bangladeshi factories declined 13% in nominal terms. Supplier profit margins fell 13.3%. Real wages, what workers could actually buy with their pay, dropped 6.5% despite a nominal wage increase. Do the math. The system didn't just fail to improve after 1,134 people died. It got worse. And it's still happening. 79% of garment buyers had not adjusted prices to account for the 2023 wage increase. EU import prices from Bangladesh declined nearly 6% in 2025, while volume rose 14%. Brands are buying more and paying less. Now here's the number that makes this whole system obscene. A t-shirt at $3.50 at the factory gate retails for $39. The worker sees 25 to 60 cents. A living wage would cost brands roughly 50 cents more per shirt. That's 2.5% of the retail price. $0.50. Remember that number, 50 cents, because we'll see it again at the end. When the pandemic hit in 2020, brands cancelled $3.17 billion in orders from Bangladesh. 2.3 million workers laid off or suspended. Over 70% sent home without pay. 95% of brands refused to contribute to wages or severance. The scale of that betrayal lives in one comparison. C&A cancelled $125 million in orders from Bangladesh alone. The Brenninkmeier family that owns C&A has a net worth of $22 billion. November 2023. Workers demanded roughly $208 a month. The government settled at $113. That's 38% of what economists estimate as a living wage. During those protests, at least 4 workers were shot dead by police. One of them was Anjuara Khatun, 23 years old, a sewing operator, mother of 2. Shot in the head in Ghazipur on November 8th. Police fired 118 shotgun rounds in a single incident. Blanket warrants issued against up to 44,000 unnamed workers. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's response? Accept the wage or go back to your village. Even that $113 has eroded. The taka has depreciated 30% against the dollar since 2022. 83% of factories have no union. And here's the one that should stay with you. 91% of textile workers cannot afford enough food for themselves and their families. And here's the part that should make you angriest. The brands know all of this. Fashion Revolution's Transparency Index found that 99% of major brands do not disclose the number of workers paid a living wage. 99%. So the brands squeeze suppliers, the suppliers squeeze workers, and the workers have nowhere to go. But there's a new player that makes H&M look generous. Shein. Revenue rocketed from $3 billion in 2019 to $32 billion in 2023, an estimated $38 billion in 2024. The company adds thousands of new styles every single day and can restock in 7 days. Zara takes 14. Average item price, $9. But here's the machine behind it. Shein runs through roughly 7,000 small workshops in Guangzhou. Workers paid as little as 4 cents per garment, working 75-hour weeks. Shein doesn't just undercut Bangladesh on price, it undercuts the entire model of mass-order manufacturing that Bangladesh depends on. And it's dragging every other brand's prices down with it. But Shein is just the latest symptom. The real disease is structural, and it has no obvious cure. The core paradox is brutally simple. Raise wages, brands move, factories close, millions unemployed, political collapse. Don't raise wages, 4 million workers in permanent poverty, malnutrition, preventable death. The harsh reality is, there is no clean exit. So how did the world's second-largest clothing exporter end up with no bargaining power? The academic name for this is a buyer-driven global value chain. Here's what it means in practice. The profits flow to whoever controls brand, design, and retail, never to the factory. Bangladesh does only cut, make, trim, the absolute lowest value activity in the chain. Think of it like a restaurant where Bangladesh chops the vegetables but never sets the menu or collects the bill. Here's the kicker. The people who set the menu have all the power. In the US, 29 retailers account for 98% of all apparel sales. On the other side, 3,500 Bangladesh factories compete for those same orders. Factories regularly accept orders below cost just to fill capacity. Brand switching costs are catastrophically low. VF Corporation, that's North Face, Vans, cut 12 Bangladesh factories in 2023 and 2024, while adding 36 in Vietnam. One email and an entire factory loses its reason to exist. And reform? At least 17 factory owners contested parliamentary elections in 2026. Over 30% of parliament is reportedly connected to the garment industry. You can't regulate an industry that regulates you. Now look at the numbers. Ethiopia, roughly $52 a month. Myanmar, 71 to 95. Bangladesh at 113. Vietnam, 135 to 152, but with higher productivity and 16 free trade agreements. Cambodia, 210. China, 500 to 650. Notice something? Bangladesh isn't even the cheapest anymore. It's stuck in the middle, too expensive to compete with Ethiopia, too unproductive to compete with Vietnam. And automation is closing in. The ILO projects 60% of Bangladesh garment workers, 2.7 million jobs, could be displaced by 2041. Only 48% of American brands plan to increase Bangladesh sourcing in 2024, down from 58% 2 years earlier. The orders are already leaving. Remember that declining share of women in the workforce. This is why, as automation replaces sewing jobs and conditions worsen, the women who built this industry are being pushed into even more precarious informal work. So what's the obvious answer? Now there's a question you're probably asking. Why doesn't Bangladesh just diversify? Make something else? It's the obvious solution. And it doesn't work. Just move up the value chain. Impossible without decades of deliberate state industrial policy. South Korea's transition from garments to electronics took 30+ years. South Korea spends 4% of GDP on R&D. Bangladesh? Negligible. Just signed trade agreements. Bangladesh has signed one preferential trade agreement. with Bhutan. In 2020, Vietnam has 16 plus, including deals with the EU and the Pacific Rim. Just regulate the brands. The accord actually works where it operates. Zero mass casualty incidents since 2013 at 1,754 covered factories, 140,000 hazards fixed. But 856 factories remain outside any inspection authority. In October 2025, a fire at an unregistered Mirpur factory killed 16 workers, including teenagers as young as 14. The roof door was padlocked. The system works where it exists, it just doesn't exist where people die. 2/3 of Bangladesh sits less than 5 meters above sea level. 80% of the country is floodplain. Bangladesh contributes 0.4% of global emissions, but ranks 7th on the Global Climate Risk Index. The average European emits as much carbon in 11 days as the average Bangladeshi does in a year. Let that sink in. 20% of garment factories in Dhaka sit in flood-prone areas. In August 2024, floods cut garment production by half. Combined losses, $5 to $7 billion. A severe flood could reduce GDP by 9%. And here's the vicious feedback loop. Climate displacement is projected to push 13 to 20 million people into cities by 2050. Dhaka's population grew by 7 million in just 10 years, largely from climate migration. These displaced people feed the garment workforce, with ever more desperate workers willing to accept whatever wage is offered. The climate crisis doesn't just threaten the factories, it feeds the trap with human fuel. So Bangladesh can't raise wages, can't diversify, can't stop the flooding, and can't stop competitors from undercutting it. And in November 2026, it's about to lose the one advantage it still has. So what happens on November 24th, 2026? Bangladesh formally exits least developed country status. In plain terms, it's graduating from the world's poorest countries club and losing every discount that came with membership. Currently, 73% of exports enjoy duty-free access to 38 countries. After graduation, EU tariffs jump from 0 to 9 to 12%. Canada, 16 to 18. Japan, 7 to nearly 13. There's a pharmaceutical sword too. Bangladesh produces 97% of its own medicines cheaply, because its LDC status lets it copy expensive drugs without paying patent fees. Graduation ends that exemption 7 years early. Bangladesh has formally requested a deferral. Decision pending. The economy is already cracking. External debt, $104 billion, up 42% in 5 years. Non-performing loans at 24%, triple the South Asian average. Foreign reserves plunged from $48 billion in 2021 to below $20 billion in mid-2024, before partially recovering. The country's own revenue chief declared that Bangladesh has, quote, already fallen into a debt trap. And here's the number that should surprise you. Remember earlier when I said the economy rests on 2 legs? Cheap shirts and labor exported overseas. Remittances, almost $33 billion in 2025, now exceed garment exports as Bangladesh's largest source of foreign income. The lifeline everyone talks about isn't even the biggest one anymore. The ultimate revelation: no small, poor country has ever escaped the garment trap while keeping the industry and diversifying into higher-value manufacturing. The only countries that made the transition, South Korea, Taiwan, China, did so with decades of aggressive state industrial policy that Bangladesh cannot replicate. Of 101 middle-income economies in 1960, only 13 became high-income by 2008. Most required EU integration or oil wealth. Bangladesh has neither. Bangladesh doesn't have 30 years, it might not have 3. So what are the options, and why do all of them hurt? So what happens from here? There are really only three paths. The most likely, Bangladesh muddles through. It secures something called GSP Plus from the EU, essentially a backup discount program, but one that comes with 32 strings attached. Labour rights, environmental standards, governance reforms. The February 2026 trade deal with the US shows pragmatic diplomacy. A 19% tariff, but with a zero-tariff corridor for garments made with American cotton. Under this scenario, exports dip 10 to 15%. Growth slows to 3 or 4%. Workers stay poor. The trap holds. The second path, downward spiral. GSP Plus fails. Vietnam and India absorb the orders. Climate disasters accelerate. The banking crisis deepens. Bangladesh enters Sri Lanka-style IMF dependency. The industry shrinks and nothing replaces it. The third path, and this is the long shot, actual transformation. Bangladesh uses the crisis to invest in what it already does well. It already produces 97% of its own pharmaceuticals and exports to over 150 countries. But this kind of transformation took South Korea 30 years. Bangladesh may not have 3. If nothing changes, brands win, consumers win, cheap clothes continue, workers lose, and 170 million citizens absorb all the risk. Remember that 50-cent number from earlier? A living wage would cost brands about 50 cents more per shirt, roughly 2% of the retail price. The poverty isn't an economic necessity, it's a choice. Let me leave you with this. Britain took roughly 100 years from its first textile mills to comprehensive factory regulation. The United States took 27 years, from the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire in 1911, which killed 146 workers in a New York garment factory, to the Fair Labor Standards Act in 1938. Bangladesh is 13 years out from Rana Plaza. But here's the difference that matters. Triangle's consumers and producers lived in the same country. When 350,000 New Yorkers marched, politicians had to respond. Rana Plaza's consumers are 8,000 miles away. You and I buy the shirts. Someone else pays the price. Solidarity doesn't cross oceans as easily as shipping containers. Knowing that changes nothing by itself, but not knowing guaranteed it never would. The next time you buy a $9 shirt, you're not getting a deal. Someone else is paying the difference. And if you haven't seen our deep dive into the Philippines, the nation that exports its own people as an economic strategy, check it out. Links on screen. Now I want to hear from you. Drop your prediction in the comments. Does Bangladesh escape the trap in the next decade, or does it get worse? I'll see you in the next one.